Welcome to Regent Park TV. I'm Tracy. Today we're covering a key item from Toronto's Economic and Community Development Committee, chaired by Councillor Alejandra Bravo, on the city's plan to remove barriers and expand pathways to stable work for youth. With youth unemployment at 19.7% higher for Indigenous, Black, newcomer, and 2S LGBTQ+ youth. This issue is critical for communities like Regent Park, Moss Park, and St. Jamestown. At the meeting, youth residents, community members, and Toronto Youth Cabinet representatives shared powerful deputations highlighting challenges like limited job access, fair wages, mentorship, and clear career pathways. Their input helped shape committee recommendations, which included increased provincial funding for the Focus on Youth program. The plan also creates opportunities through major events like FIFA World Cup 2026, internships, hiring reforms, and expanded partnerships to strengthen job pathways. For Regent Park youth, this initiative promises access to jobs, skills, and mentorship, building stronger careers and a stronger community. Now, let's take you to the full discussion where city staff, councillors, and youth leaders detail the challenges and solutions for creating a fair employment future for Toronto's young people.
Good morning, councillors. Thanks so much for the time to speak here today. My name is Zane, and I'm the co-director of council relations for the Toronto Youth Cabinet, city's official youth advocacy body. I'm relatively new in this position, so it's nice to meet all of you, and I'm hoping to connect with all of you in the beginning of the new year. But I'm here to really acknowledge the staff report. It provides a good update of the current youth employment opportunities currently offered by the city. And I also want to acknowledge a recent announcement announced last week to increase the building skills through recreation program, which allows the participation of up to 2,000 youth by 2026. These are both meaningful steps in the right direction towards meaningful and gainful youth employment. Over the past year, we have heard from over 7,200 youth across Toronto about their experiences with seeking employment in the city through our youth employment advocacy work. These young people made something very clear. They're not asking for handouts, they're simply asking for a fair shot. 77% of these youth told us that they don't necessarily have the necessary qualifications that jobs are looking for because they haven't been given the chances to build them. 74% of those youth told us that the barriers that they face, for example, transportation, make work inaccessible and impractical. 75% of those youth told us that they consider a job to be meaningful when it aligns with their interests, values, and future goals. And finally, 60% told us that their identity, race, age, religion had created barriers towards gaining employment. It's not just an economic issue, but it's also a community well-being issue and a city building issue. For example, just this past Friday, we were involved with a youth consultation in Ward 10, and we heard the exact same messaging from those young people. Now, the staff report does recognize many of these barriers, but we also have to focus on how we define these opportunities that youth receive. The report mentions how there are currently 16,000 opportunities available for youth, but the majority of these positions, about 85%, are either Parks and Rec, which are very shift dependent, or short-term positions like 2 to 3 weeks with the CNE. It's not to say that these jobs don't matter. They're essential in supporting the work that the city and we are doing, but they're not always stable, which is a reoccurring theme that we've heard from the youth that we've consulted with over the course of our ongoing campaign. Youth want purpose. They want jobs that can lead to growth in their future. And if you want to reduce barriers to youth employment, then we should expand beyond the city and partner with private sector employers, the nonprofit, potentially even provincial and federal levels of government, community partners and organizations. And we also need to distinguish between short-term and long-term positions because 16,000 jobs is not necessarily the same as 16,000 opportunities. Toronto's youth are ready to work amidst rising economic uncertainty, but we need stable pathways and roles that can connect them to the careers of the future. As you receive this report from staff, we are calling on you not just to end the conversation there, but to continue the work so that we can create these jobs that support youth across the city. Thank you.
The next deputation is Stephen Mensah. My name is Stephen Mensah, and I'm here today as a youth advocate and consultant who has spent years working directly with young people, institutional partners, and community partners across Toronto and beyond to strengthen youth employment, safety, and pathways to opportunity. I want to acknowledge the meaningful steps the city has taken to support youth employment. However, I'm here today to discuss this specific report as it is currently written, which unfortunately does not reflect the scale or urgency of what young people have told us they need and deserve. Over the past year, tens of thousands of young people, including youth experiencing homelessness, youth in Toronto community housing, youth disengaged from school, and young people at risk of involvement in crime, share their stories with us due to citywide postcard campaign and other consultations. Their message was simple. Young people want to work, they want to contribute, and they want a path towards stability. They told us that the pathways are confusing, the barriers are structural, and the opportunities are too few, too short, and too disconnected from long-term careers. This was reflected in the Youth Employment Report released this summer with the neighborhood group United Way and other partners, a report I was proud to be involved in. Youth spoke about the cost of transportation, identity-based discrimination, a lack of mentorship, and the absence of a coordinated pathway into stable, meaningful work. What they asked for most was something this report does not provide, which is a scaled, coordinated youth employment program with real job targets, real funding, and real partnerships across the public, private, and nonprofit sectors. This cannot be separated from the broader reality facing our city. Toronto is seeing increases in youth involvement, violence, and crime. Young people now make up the majority of those charged in homicides, a reality that is unacceptable but preventable. Youth employment is one of the strongest violence prevention tools we have. When Council adopted EC 18.6 in February, or committee adopted it, the direction was not simply to inventory programs, it was also to identify opportunities and resources for new or expanded youth employment programs and to include intergovernmental funding to deal with this youth labor market crisis. However, as it currently stands, the report does not set job creation targets. It does not include a funding request. It also does not outline a cross-sector hiring strategy. And it does not include a meaningful intergovernmental plan, despite the fact that provincial and federal funding reforms are already affecting youth outcomes here in Toronto. These pieces are not just nice to haves, they are the foundation of a real youth employment system. The young people in the city have already done their part. They've named the barriers and proposed solutions, and they have made it clear that a stronger citywide approach is needed. Today, I'm kindly asking the committee to strengthen this report so that it aligns with previous direction and with what young people have told us. Specifically, I urge the committee to consider the following amendments. First, to direct staff to develop a youth employment program with a clear target of 10,000 additional youth jobs by summer of 2026, a target which is fully aligned with Council's commitment under Action 16 of the city's 10-year action plan for Toronto's economy. Two, establish division by division youth hiring targets across the entire city, not only within parks and recreation. Cities like Chicago, Boston, and New York have demonstrated the impact of diversified public sector hiring pathways, and Toronto can do the same. Third, develop a real intergovernmental strategy with specific ask to the provincial and federal governments on funding, wage subsidies, allocations, and employer incentives. And lastly, transforming this youth employment table into a formal implementation body with measurable employee commitments and regular public reporting back to Council. I also want to add that I strongly support Councillor Candavel's motion or amendment motion and urge the committee to keep the amendments aligned with EC 18.6, especially on accountability and job targets. Young people in this city are facing real challenges, but they also have real ambitions. And the amendments I'm suggesting would bring this work in line with previous commitments already made and meet the realities facing our communities. This is a moment to move beyond good intentions and to commit to the concrete, measurable actions that young people have been calling for, actions that strengthen our economy, support community safety, and help prevent violence before it begins. Toronto has led before and it can lead again. Thank you very much for your time, and I appreciate your commitment.
Thank you for your deputation. Are there any questions of the deputant? Councillor Candeville.
Thank you, Madam Speaker or Chair. To the deputant, Stephen, you spoke to the need on a target over what you described as an open-ended process. Why is that significant?
Thank you for the question, Councillor. No, because without a target, there's no way to measure progress. Every major city that has successfully reduced youth unemployment and youth violence has done it while setting clear, ambitious, bold targets to achieve. Toronto already does this on climate, housing, equity, and other areas. We know how to use targets towards pushing for systemic change. I think the question really lies is whether we're willing to be bold and ambitious for young people in the same way as we've been able to be bold and ambitious on other pivotal and critical areas the city is facing. And lastly, importantly, the 10,000 jobs piece, as mentioned in my remarks, has already been adopted twice. It appears in Action 16 of the 10-year action plan, and it was also explicitly directed in the EC 18.6 motion at Economic and Development Committee this February, which specifically mentions 10,000 additional youth summer jobs. And so this is not a new number or an ambiguous number. It just simply references what Council and Committee has already committed to.
You mentioned Boston. If you can clarify what you meant by their strategy for youth employment.
Yeah, I think one thing that I've seen that's aligned with American cities is just the boldness and the ambition to make sure that the young people who are out of school or also in school are able to access meaningful and gainful employment opportunities, not just in the summer, but year round. I know for the current Boston mayor, when she first came in, I believe her target she set was don't quote me, I think it was between 30 to 50,000. But I know Chicago, they do 30,000 young people. They provide them with meaningful opportunities every summer. We know the city of New York does 100,000 jobs for youth every summer. And I want to not understate the importance of the intergovernmental work. Just like the previous deputant have mentioned, or at the start, we do not expect the city to pay for this whole endeavor. That should not happen. I think instead we hope that the city can use and leverage their role, yes, as an employer, but also as a convener, as an advocate to the federal and provincial government, to the private sector, and across industry to get everyone to the table. And I think that's something other cities have been able to effectively do to build momentum and support towards this issue of addressing youth employment and addressing the rise in youth violence that they also were experiencing.
Mm-hmm. Would you say Boston's a comparable city and their strategy of a central hub? And I think her commitment was a job for every youth who wants one. Would that be comparable?
Yes, I would. And I think just that quote, job for every youth who wants one, that's the same message in the mayor of New York when he first got elected 4 years ago came in and said, it's like every young New Yorker who wants a job will get a job. And so I think we have comparable cities that we can look at who've met the moment, although it wasn't easy and it's going to require work and effort. But I think young people deserve the ambition, they deserve the boldness. And I know as a city, we've proven to lead in many other areas. And I know we can do this again in respect to the issue of youth employment.
Mm-hmm. In August, Mayor Wu celebrated 10,000 jobs for young people with a smaller population. Lastly, cross-sector strategy. You point out this is missing in this report. Why is that imperative for an effective strategy?
It's imperative because, young people, they told us loud and clear, they want that diversity of employment opportunities. They want to be able to work, yes, in the nonprofit, yes, for different, city agencies, divisions, and corporations, but also in different industries in the private sector. We have the same tech industries, healthcare, movie industry. Like we have all these diverse industries in the city. And I think it's about bringing them to the table to ask, what are we doing to give young people meaningful and gainful employment? And if we're not doing enough or doing anything, how can we partner together to actually make sure Toronto's equity-deserving youth have access to those opportunities? And I think even beyond just the fact that these young people are equity-deserving, I think it's the reality that these young people are talented. They're skilled, talented young people who are hardworking, who are willing and ready to work and contribute. They're just looking for an opportunity to do as such.
Great. Lastly, you spoke to real funding. Do you see that in this report?
No.
Thank you.
I have a couple of questions of the deputant. You said that the City of Toronto isn't doing anything for youth jobs, and I'm sure you're aware that the report indicates there are 16,000 youth employment opportunities, and the mayor just announced a doubling of the city's building skills through recreation to 2,000 youth age 15 to 24 to get youth job ready. So I just wanted to say that seems like something to me, but like with the previous deputant, I understand why you're here at city council, because you can talk to us, but wouldn't you agree that to be able to bring private enterprise to the table, to have the real sources of funds, which are available to provincial government in particular and to the federal government, is a place to direct this advocacy? Because I'm not seeing a lot of emphasis from the provincial government on this, and I note that the Ontario Youth Job Strategy isn't what it was before. In fact, it's completely subsumed in a greater job strategy, which has no focus on youth. What are your thoughts around that?
Thank you for the question, Councillor. Just to clarify, and I started my remarks by acknowledging that the city has taken steps to support youth employment. So I don't believe I said the city is not doing anything on youth employment. We do all acknowledge, and I can say very clearly, I acknowledge that the city is doing a lot. I mean, I think per municipality, according to a report, we're doing the most in respect to providing jobs to young people. And so I think that itself is a fact and nothing that I've disputed and would dispute. I think my messaging and remarks are really emphasizing the role of the city to take lead. Yes, obviously we all can do more, but take lead in respects to bringing other people to the table. Because ultimately we know there are unique challenges that the city of Toronto faces, not just in respect to youth violence, but also youth unemployment. And so that's where the core minutia of my messaging is speaking to, is the role the city can take as a leader to advocate to other levels of government, to convene, and yes, to still fund some of these initiatives so that we can do more to hire more young people. And to the other part of your question in respects to provincial government, the advocacy that needs to happen to the private sector. I think over the last couple of months and historically, work has been done to engage private sector and other levels of government. But I think it just reinforces the need for the city as a government, as an institution, to also support and enhance that advocacy to ensure that all the relevant players are doing their part. And I acknowledge that with a lot of employment, Ontario transformations, and things that have been happening across the province, it's made an issue of youth employment worse. I think that's something that's always been acknowledged, but it's also one where, we believe the city can and should take leadership to push and enhance and enlarge these conversations with other levels of government so that we can actually have some type of impact.
Some of the good elements in this report, from my view, is addressing the barriers in hiring, and I'm particularly referencing the failure of the federal government to purge data that was collected through contact between police and youth, previously known as carding. Is that an element that the table would take on to kind of accelerate? Because it really is a systemic and structural barrier, and you're not allowed to know what that interaction was. And this has gone to the Supreme Court of Canada.
So through the chair, as suggested, the race-based data collection through carding remains a challenge for a lot of youth trying to seek employment and volunteer opportunities. As part of this report, our colleagues at People in Equity have identified the need for us to coordinate as the city a better review of youth employment applications and reference checks, so the city itself can have better coordination of that and provide clear opportunities for youth who have had criminal records and other engagements, including having their information in police data sets. We hope to, as part of the table, have these conversations as well with other private sector and public sector partners to talk about how do we remove barriers for all youth particularly youth who are facing most marginalization and have been in conflict with the law, but also, to your point, have not been in conflict with the law, but have simply had their personal information stored in a database.
Thank you. In terms of the area of responsibility, so 90% of workforce responsibilities are within the provincial government's purview, and I know that Manitoba has Manitoba Youth Job Centers for 13 to 29-year-olds where they receive free assistance in finding their first job. We heard that the provincial government's contribution right now to solving the youth jobs crisis is close to zero. In terms of what, therefore, we have to focus on what was within our area of responsibility with the constitutional powers that we have on a property tax base. Is it accurate, taking some of the answers to other questions, that one of the very tangible and material things that the municipal government like the City of Toronto can do is the knowledge of where the greatest gaps are, the social development maps that exist, the support and tools and enabling programs that have been developed over time to close the gap for young people, particularly those who are furthest from the job market for a bunch of different reasons, including they're not going to get jobs at their parents' friends' firms, for example.
Thank you for the question, Chair. Yes, one of the things that the inventory has been able to do is really provide us with a sense of those numbers, but also to be able to identify some of those gaps. We know that work is not completed. That is just begun. In fact, all of this is just the beginning of this work. When we come together across that table, that is where more information will be shared, more gathering will be happening, and a better understanding of how to not only what are those gaps, but how do we address them.
Thank you. And in terms of going forward, to the question from the Vice Chair, the kind of the matching between opportunity and youth is something it's very challenging to do, but I'm happy to hear that that's something that can be considered. All of the questions about the implementation of getting to yes and leveraging private enterprise, other orders of government, leveraging all of the pieces that are within the city's purview, is that going to constitute some of what the terms of reference or what the mandate of the table will be?
Thank you for the question, Chair. Absolutely. There is a number of pieces that the table will come together on, including setting those targets and objectives, identifying those gaps, understanding where those opportunities are, really bringing in the corporate sector, a number of pieces that will outline its terms of reference and its objectives and goals on an annual basis.
And by having the private sector at the table and like an organization like United Way, which has very deep private sector relationships with where they support the mandate, that could be a way to identify some business champions?
Absolutely.
And can that then constitute the provincial policy ask that we make in a coordinated way to say this is what all of the things that we can offer and that we've built out, including expertise. Now we need some funding, and we need the provincial government to take this really seriously in Ontario. Correct?
We know that in our advocacy work, the more partners we have across different sectors who are in line with sort of what we're trying to do through both the table and the charter will only help our advocacy efforts.
All right. That's a lot of questions, a lot of interest in this. It's an important issue, and now we're going to go to speakers. I see Councillor Moyse, Deputy Mayor Malik. I will speak. I think there will be many motions. Councillor Candeville. Yeah. And I believe Councillor Shan would like to speak. So that's most of us. So we're going to go this way, the people in live, and then we'll go online to Councillor Shan. Go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Chair. You are in the Speaker's chair. Do you have my motion? Staff? Okay, if you could post it online. So the unemployment rate, student employment rate, youth unemployment rate was 7.1% in 2018, pre-pandemic, and now it's almost doubled to 15.2%. The city has used every lever available to it to actually try to help young people, especially marginalized youth in our communities, when it comes to Black and Indigenous and to us LGBTQ youth. But clearly what we're doing is not enough. And I know when I was a school board trustee, the Focus on Youth program really did help kids in marginalized areas like Regent Park in particular, where gun violence and crime was incredibly high. And what really saved the community back then was the Focus on Youth program. We know that it has worked. And also, too, we spoke about working in partnership with other organizations, nonprofit and others. And the school board is one of those organizations. And so the motion that I'm bringing forth here really talks about, I'm just going to pull it up on my phone here, talks about increasing the Focus on Youth program funding, which is currently at $8.1 million to $15 million to reflect the increase, the doubling youth unemployment rate across the province, and particularly in Toronto. And also to the second part of that motion was to actually also add the annual inflation rate to that as well. So really that's the gist of my motion. I know that the city, again, does all what it can, and I'll give an example of one of the things we're working on in Toronto Centre. For example, in phases 4 and 5, in the Regent Park phases of 4 and 5, we are actually creating more skilled jobs for not only for people in general in Regent Park, but also for youth as well. And in regards to the George Street revitalization, we are working to have 30% of the employment there be part of youth skill training. So again, we are doing our parts locally at the city, and that will be reflected hopefully over time as those numbers increase, and hopefully bring the unemployment rate among youth lower as well. But again, focusing on marginalized communities, which has really been hit hard since the pandemic itself. And that's all I want to say. Thanks.
Thank you. Any questions of the mover? Next to speak, we've got Deputy Mayor Malik.
Thank you very much. And I'll echo what we already heard here today and what's laid out in the report, that youth unemployment continues to be a pressing issue for so many families and young people in our city. I hear about it regularly in my community, and I think we actually have a row of former trustees who also have that experience firsthand, being in our schools and in our neighborhoods. And I know and I understand that even, for as long as we have been in some of these roles, that there have been important calls to reduce barriers, and that this report in front of us continues to prioritize the measures that keep kind of chipping away at the barriers and bringing them down. And I want to thank you, staff. I want to thank staff for the report, and community members and partners, and especially young people in Toronto for your contributions. Of course, the Toronto Youth Cabinet, but so many different advocacy organizations and groups of young people who have made their voices heard through this continued work. And as is outlined, these steps aim to build a more equitable system and call for stronger collaboration across governments and sectors to advance youth employment opportunities. And I'm pleased to see that the motions being brought forward from my colleagues continue to provide that guidance and that direction for that kind of cross-government collaboration. And in my ward, I'm responding to these calls with local action alongside city staff and community partners that complement our citywide efforts. Actually, this past Friday with the city's community development and social services team and Toronto Community Housing, we hosted a youth employment consultation to better inform addressing barriers to employment for young people in my downtown communities, taking a by youth for youth approach, with the Toronto Youth Cabinet facilitating that discussion alongside city staff. And the insights shared during that consultation will help shape our initiatives in 2026, which include a resource fair and, input into the Youth Activation Summit to prepare for the FIFA World Cup 2026 related sectors, such as tourism, event operations, and hospitality. And we heard from so many on Friday that continue to echo what we're hearing from young people across the city, is that there is a critical service gap for youths, particularly in that age range between 15 and 18, though we know that it extends across our kind of understanding of young people, and that it's a priority for us to address, and that young people in our city are also really excited to take on opportunities and to make sure that they are visible to them, that they are available, and that they are within reach. And I'm glad to see that our 2026 priority actions do look to address that in some real and tangible ways. We will keep working with our partners in all sectors for young people in Toronto to succeed, and I thank you again for this effort.
Thank you. Councillor Candeville to speak.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I have a motion in 5 parts to be shared. First is asking the federal and particularly the provincial to help meet our employment targets. 2, for the federal portion, which staff has shared, is significant, but however needs to be proportionate to our population. 3rd, to embed employment opportunities within the youth employment table, giving it a mandate and definition. 4th, to come back to ECDEV to report on progress with the first report in May 2026. Transparency and accountability are obviously very key. We like to see what's working and what challenges remain. Finally, the last part asks the mayor to consider budget allocations that will allow SDFA to build the capacity to deliver on this important work. If we expect stronger outcomes, we must ensure the division has the tools and budget to create these employment opportunities. I want to thank staff for their work through the last year and their engagement with many stakeholders. I want to thank TYC, both administrations, particularly the outgoing one that did a lot of work leading into December 2024 and into this year, as well as the TNG and the United Way for their considerable contributions. Toronto's home to obviously a very large youth population. However, young people continue to face barriers and encounter limited job availability. Very sadly, in our ward and many parts of particularly the suburbs in Toronto, we're seeing our young people compete with employers offering vulnerable workers, international students, temporary foreign workers, cash jobs considerably below the minimum wage. And this is one of the biggest challenges facing youth employment. But there is some change. The certification programs being offered or considered bridge some gaps, but we need to do more to lead on this serious issue. It's no coincidence. The sociological literature is clear. Youth crime rates are at alarming levels in relation to the lack of belonging. Employment provides considerable belonging. So there's much that we can do. Our long-term prosperity depends on young people transitioning into stable, meaningful work. With coordinated leadership, intentional support, and clear targets, we can significantly strengthen pathways for young people across our city and create opportunities for them. However, as the mover of this motion, going back to December of last year, it's very challenging and difficult for me to support this, given the feedback we heard from our partners, we heard from youth, that there isn't a clear pathway to how the committee endorsed position of the creation of up to 10,000 jobs are going to be created. What we did last December is we punted it to ECDEV, and earlier this year, it was watered down, in my opinion, asking all of us, including staff, to come back this committee with a tangible, clear, concrete way towards creating up to 10,000 jobs. This is missing the mark in this report. There isn't a clear approach, resourcing, and budget to achieve this important objective. And we heard this from a number of stakeholders. The report can do with more ambition. We know and we see other cities comparable Chicago, particularly Boston, in which the leadership across all voices spoke high, spoke loud, created the budget, 10 million, to provide over 10,000 jobs. That creativity is missing. It's required. It's incumbent on us to create that. Employment, we know, provides hope, social belonging, and the absence of youth engagement leads to downstream consequences. Though crime is down across our city, we know the stats are very clear. Youth violence, particularly youth gun violence, is on the rise markedly. We saw that perhaps sadly captured in the Javoy Roy incident, where months later, 2 teenagers were arrested. It's not one incident out of the ordinary. It is a clear example of youth violence that is on the rise in our city. The ability to provide hope and belonging is critical. So with that, my hope in leading to City Council, we find the space and money to prioritize youth employment.
Thank you. Question of the mover. Oh, you want to speak? Okay, go ahead. Okay, question of the mover.
Maybe it's the point of order, I don't know. So you mentioned that this report doesn't meet the mark, but the report also stated that, we were able to secure 16,000 jobs based on the report. And also you said that there's no solution, or there's no tangible solution to the problems that we face. But yet the motions that you brought forth are making requests 1 through 4, making requests of the federal and provincial government to actually provide funding. So how does that help alleviate the 15.2% unemployment rate that is before us today?
Okay.
Unless the other option, is perhaps raising taxes. So, you're okay with that. Just make sure you're in the record to say that.
Okay, there's a lot there. Let me try my best to unpack it. Let's work backwards, perhaps. We've had significant property tax increases these last 3 years, 24% in total. As to my last comment, my hope is that we find the budget to create this in the time leading to City Council. Number 2, I think you can walk and chew gum at the same time. Be critical of our approach, as well as recognizing the provincial government in particular has not stepped to the plate, and we're looking for the federal government to reform their budgetary allocation so it's proportionate to our youth population. And number 3, the 16,000 question you had, that's a reference to the existing number of youth jobs that the staff have articulated in the database.
I think that it's clear that we all agree that the way to deal with the crisis, or one of the tools that we have as a society to deal with the crisis facing youth today, is to create pathways for employment. This motion really addresses the areas of jurisdiction that we have, the projects that we initiate to go further and deeper to ensure that there are more construction hours to apprentices and pre-apprentices, particularly those youth who are systemically excluded, and that is largely going to be youth who are racialized, Black youth, Indigenous youth, and that's a strategy that we know works. The Toronto Community Benefits Network has submitted a letter requesting something similar, and as an expert in connecting youth all across this city from a very grassroots perspective, all the way into a career pathway, gratified to see that. We want to make sure that we're leveraging every opportunity, particularly on things that we can control, where we can have more agency. There's also a letter of support for the report and for this particular motion from Councillor Myers, who is an original seconder of that member motion, and he's been paying attention to this as we go. I want to thank my colleagues for the motions that they've brought forward. I think they're important. It clearly signals that there's an ecosystem that is required to be working in favor of youth employment opportunities if we're to succeed. I want to go back to the the responsibility for workforce planning is really with the provincial government. The provincial government is responsible for apprenticeships, for training. It has Employment Ontario offices. It spends billions of dollars in this area. Right now, there is no provincial youth strategy for employment in Ontario that is workable or that is really meeting the urgency of the moment. Many of the youth that we're thinking of right now, it's not pocket money that they're looking for. They're funding their own educations, and for many youth, including many young people in my community who I've seen grow up, they've always worked to enhance the family income because their families depend on that work. So we absolutely agree. The question here around other cities and what that's possible, that some of the data cited from New York City and Boston, I think is misleading. That it was always done in partnership with the private sector and with regional and national governments, because that's the only way that we can achieve these goals. And the creation of a table from which I hope champions will emerge that are credible in business, private enterprise, with a powerful voice to our provincial and federal partners. If the funding comes from the tax base that really can make massive investments in social services and social and economic development, the city is ready. To echo the vice chair, we did not have this inventory before. It was absolutely crucial. We need data. We don't have the data to track the outcomes. And now we're setting up those systems. The focus on the need to purge the carding data wherever it doesn't threaten public safety is absolutely crucial for this thing to work. Metrolinx was committed to a framework, for example, with the Community Benefits Network, and there were people that were hired that as a security guard and let go after because they never know what they did, but it was because of their previous interactions. It requires that we work collectively, and so I want to thank staff for moving this very quickly. I think that there's so much capacity within social development with the recognition of who we need to support the most, and we have important, credible division of Toronto Employment Services. We are leaders in this area, and I want to thank you for bringing this to us in this way. Clearly, there's more to do, but collectively, I think we are asking you to press further and harder, and let's focus on where we have the jurisdiction and the power and the levers, and then take our advocacy up. Thank you. All those in favor of the motion? Opposed? That's carried.
Thank you so much for watching. Don't forget to like, comment, share, and subscribe to our YouTube channel. Also follow us on social media, and for more information, check out our website.